Greetings, dear listener. This is a reaction video to the video of, I'm sorry if I mispronounce his name, I'm not certain how to pronounce this right, Arith Härger. I'm sorry, I'm not making fun of it, I just don't know entirely. Arith Härger made just most recently a video with the title, What Do We Truly Know About the Druids? Now, I found the video most interesting, but quite confusing, though from a certain point of view it is certainly not without value and merit to know what he's speaking about in this video, but it is sort of so, in a greater sense, destructive. I felt it was so destructive and in a sense even acidic, mean-spirited, that I felt that I had to make a sort of reaction video. Now, to the most, he's apparently most educated about the topic, so I'm not trying to disclaim that. He's a lot of followers, and this video got a lot of views. So I don't know anything about that person's background. So I'm just speaking about the video as it is. And to those who probably will listen to it are people who practice Druidry or are interested in Druidry, or in the broader sense, the Celtic-rooted ways of spirituality. So to them, I am obliged to explain a little bit who I am, why I'm even making this video, because the natural assumption would be that I am a Druid, I'm interested in Druidry, and nothing of this is the case. I am of German origin, born, speaking of ethnicity, I am a Roman cultor, meaning I'm a priest of the Roman religion, or neo-Roman religion, as Mr. Härger would probably call it. So, as a Roman polytheist, the German, I have no personal interest in defending Druidry as it is. Still, I feel obliged that I need to try that. So I am not a Druid, I am not interested in becoming a Druid, I am trying to defend what people in modern Druidry do. That is what I try to do in this audio. It's not a video because I don't record myself, because there's nothing to see. And why I believe that many of his criticisms are, shall we say, not productive and sort of missing the entire point of religion in itself, or spirituality in the broader sense. Now, both spirituality and religion are different terms, and it is quite unfortunately today that people are either clinging to one or the other, but religion and spirituality are in our world and time, just as in any time, needed, which is my personal opinion, which hopefully connects me with people who follow other religions or other spiritual movements like Druidry, like witchcraft, like Wicca, like whatever you do. And as a spiritual person and a religious person, being both, of course, what Mr. Härger does in his video is explaining from a purely materialistic historian point of view, which is absolutely valid to do. It is not that I say it is what he says is in this materialistic historical sense untrue, though there are a few untruths in what he says, which a few I will pick up, which are sort of outdated views of historical science. At least I'm a historian myself. I'm a magister, which is a degree which you once get in Germany, which is like a master degree. So I'm a historian myself, so I know a little bit about the standards of historical science myself. And he puts the idea of Druidism, or Druidrism, I'm not entirely certain, of Druids, from this materialistic scientific lens, which is, as I say again, an entirely valid view if you are a materialist. if you deny the reality of spirituality. There are even some points which I have to criticize from within the materialistic view. But it sort of misses the point. I mean, the question is, I'm not entirely certain who is the audience that Mr. Härger is talking to. I mean, I can just speculate. He has this medieval sort of shirt under background, which makes me assume, not saying it is so, and I've again not spent any time, that he himself is or was involved in the pagan scene, and he somehow comes over as a sort of criticizing from the internal. I'm to say this, I'm 50 now. I'm a pagan since I was 16, so I know the pagan world for quite a number of decades now. I'm not saying that to boast, but I have met this type of person before, so to speak, that people who, how shall I say it, spread this aura of intellectual superiority. For I know how things are, and you peasants are just making up your fantasies. I mean, for the first 10 years or so, I was an Asatru. The term was not used in Germany at the time. I was a Germanic pagan, and this is a debate also now in the Roman polytheist religion, which I'm all too familiar with. People who always come up, this is not what is written in the text. This is not historical. This is not what was done 2,000 years ago. And I'm sorry to say, but I am really sick and tired, personally speaking, about this debate. And if he's speaking as an academic, to an academic audience, there is nothing wrong with this video. No, don't take me wrong. It's entirely perfect to say the Druids of today are not, as we know, doing what the Druids did in the past, because we almost know not what the Druids of the past did. That is, from a materialistic point of view, entirely perfect and right as an academic to say to an academic audience. Right. But from the way this video appears and the way it is spread, it seems to be more like an internal critic. Like, I have to say, someone who followed a spiritual path, maybe he was a Druid or even is a Druid, though as derogatory as he uses the term, I have my doubts about it. Like, he comes off like the parent who tells the children there is no Santa Claus. You see? And this is, why would you do this? I mean, unless you speak as an academic to an academic audience, then all religion, all spirituality is bollocks. I mean, I am practicing shamanistic and magical arts, as ever you want to call it. So I'm a practitioner of magic, of the occult, for as long as I am a pagan. From a materialistic view of psychology, of neurology, this is just a fantasy of the brain. You can be of this worldview. It's perfectly fine. When I argue as a historian, I stick to the materialistic view just myself. But making videos, I'm not waltzing around and saying you can't do this because this is not unreal, because it seems like an imbalanced view on the world. And the problem of our modern society, most apparently, is that in my personal experience and in my personal point of view, is that our Western society went so deep into the purely materialistic worldview that it damaged our soul. I know this is a Christian term, and Mr. Härger would make this signs like it is, you know, he makes this in his video all the time, like it is just a word, which is a little bit a strange habit, but I'm not wanting to criticize his personal habits of gesturing. It is just, it breathes this aura of this atmosphere of intellectual know-it-all, which why are you approaching people who practice these things and develop a new spirituality, which I deeply believe our societies need, humanity need? If you can disagree with this, it reminds me of the biography of, what was it called, Mr. Simmons of Aleister Crowley. Now, whatever you think of Aleister Crowley, the problem is that Mr. Simmons does not believe in magic or the spiritual per se. So he's writing a biography about an occultist being anti-occult. And the result is, of course, that the presentation of the life of Aleister Crowley through this biography feels disastrous. Because Mr. Simmons, whose first name I've now forgotten, Mr. Simmons is a disbeliever in magic, a disbeliever in the occult, a disbeliever in anything which is a materialist, and he's writing a biography about an occultist and a spiritual person. And of course, the result is that the reader must come to a very negative conclusion, and it was the result of this biography which did much damage to what Aleister Crowley did and the person. And this is the problematic view. It is, he's speaking like an outsider, so to speak. I mean, probably will tell me he is initiated into Druidism and knows much more than I ever knew, which probably made the case. But the way he's speaking here is like I have this guess that his orientation is more political left. I'm not saying this to slander this. I'm a classic liberal myself, just to make this clear. But he speaks of this colonialism, so like a justification for ethnic colonialism, and he apparently has a motivation of his own to discredit Druidism, I must say. I mean, he brings points when he cites classical authors, both Christian and non-Christian, and it is important and right to question their motivations. Why did they write this? Like when he says Tacitus or Christian authors, like in a video he says, he praises the Druids to discredit a pagan author. But he's quite not honest with his own motivations, which is, we can just guess. Other people who know him better and more detailed may answer this more certainly. But it has a certain modernist, leftist feel when he's always bringing this, it's like it was to justify the ethnic purity and nationalism and colonialism, especially colonialism. Like, I'm not saying this is not true. That is not the point. But it is a sort of a simplification of something. Like there were malicious white French people who wanted to push their empire and made up Druidry like this. And all the people that follow this are stupid, unenlightened people bowing into colonialist ideas. And it is unfortunately a trend of people motivated by the left, which is why I assume this, or I may be mistaken. It is a very problematic, like when they find something in history of Western culture which had problematic or negative elements, which virtually everything in human history had, they want to do it away entirely. Like, how is the saying, pouring out the baby with the bathwater? It's what Mr. Härger seems to aim for, is like, there was the problematic colonialist idea of the last centuries, which without a doubt were there and were problematic. No, I've not criticism with that, but because of that, he seems to imply, let's drop it all. Which seems to be an extremist and, as I say, unbalanced view of things. I mean, we can see this in Roman polytheism, in very strongly, of course, in German paganism-polytheism. We know there were nationalist movements. We know the history of Germany of the 20th century, for heaven's sake. And yet, why would we let people with bad intent have their way entirely by disregarding a thing just because some evil groups of the past misused ideas for their purpose? Because frankly, and I said this in my videos, which I usually make in German, where I'm much more eloquent about than a foreign language, there is no idea which is so good that it cannot be used for bad purposes. That is just the reality. So, of course, you can all sort of in-group, out-group definition can be used for nefarious purposes. He does not say this clearly, like, oh, it's evil colonialism and evil, but he brings it often enough to bring home a point why it is supposed to be bad. And one of the first things he's bringing is this, and it is a very, very modern thing, very progressive thing to believe, that they say, oh, the people in the past did not think of ethnicity. And everyone could become a Celt. Everyone. And of course, it is a half-truth, but it is also a half-lie. Of course, the people in the past were not as, in the nationalistic sense, focused on nationalistic or ethnic identity. Like, what is ethnic identity? Ethnic identity is that our people through intermarriage, through blood, I'm making the gesture he's making now, through blood are related, which are a society of genetically related people, which is given that the people of the past were much less mobile, not traveling all the world, not migrating over the entire world, unless there was a migration movement of larger proportion, like the famous people migration period. But generally speaking, people did not travel far and did not move to the other end of the world, as now is becoming common, because they lacked the means. And for that reason, of course, most identity groups were people related through blood, through genes, through intermarriage. That is not because of some evil fascistic colonial exclusion, but it was just the result of a matter of fact of development. So, of course, you have people who are Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, and whatever, just through the matter of fact that people stayed in the same area by and large. And the people of the past, there were several videos which followed the question, were the Romans racist or not? Because especially Rome, was founded on a very open idea. Like when Romulus was supposed to found a city, myth or not, you could become Roman. And this was an idea throughout all the Roman Empire. You can become a Roman. No matter where you come from. We know this, but it is not as black and white. I'm not making a pun here saying that. It is not as black and white cut, like a society can be either all inclusive, like ethnicity does not matter at all. Everyone can become a Roman, everyone can become a Celt just by habituation, which is in that sense just not true. Or the reverse, it is an ethnic chauvinistic society. It is a thinking in extremes which is not likely true to historical facts. So if some people came to a tribe who practiced Celtic culture and who were related in blood, sorry I'm using that word, related in blood through many generations, we know that ancestry through all ancient culture was very important. Like, who was your father? Who was your mother? This idea of, we had a strong idea of ancestor worship, and people do not worship their ancestors if the ancestry is of no relevance. If the blood relation is unimportant and everyone become part of you or your group, then ancestor worship would not exist. The existence of ancestor worship in virtually all ancient culture is a proof that it is very important to whom we are related, what family you come from. It is not that it is in this nationalistic, but it is in a tribal sense. And people do not have to mix this up. Like we see this negative through a lens of modern day nationalistic development and see, oh, we must not exclude anyone, and then pretend that the glorious people of the past were unexclusive, which is everyone in a sense uses the past for his own use. That is not something that is particular to Druidism or Western ways. All people of all times have used the past as a medium to to define themselves, shall we say. Because I will go back to this point, but I will go a little bit to the spiritual point at first to not mix things up too much. The problem is, where does religion come from? I mean, how did Druids come to be in the first place? That is the big question. And that we do not know, though we do know a little bit how the Roman cult came to be, because we know from the writings of Plutarch, who writes about the second king of Rome, King Numa Pompilius, who was in contact with a nymph, a sort of demigoddess. And this nymph explained to King Numa, so the legend goes, how to organize the cult. So, personal gnosis, as we would call it, the personal spiritual contact, is essentially always the way religion comes to be, or spirituality, both, comes to be. Some people have a spiritual religious experience, and it manifests over time, it crystallizes over time into the behavior of his family, then his clan, his tribe, and so further. It grows further in circle, and people of neighboring tribes and villages have spiritual experiences, shamanistic experiences, occult experiences, and translate this into habit. It's not like religion is created like people sit on a table like modern engineers and make stuff just up. I mean, sometimes this may have been the case, but by and large, all religion and all spirituality comes through revelation. This is always the origin, and the only way to see this different is from a purely materialistic, anti-spiritual, anti-religious point of view. So the basis is not as neutral. There is always the question, do I ask the question about religion and spirituality from a materialistic point of view, or do I accept the reality of the spiritual world? This is the predetermining factor which is not reasonable in itself, because it is a general problem of logic, a general problem of Western materialistic thinking, that it assumes to be objective when it is not. That is a predetermined, non-rational decision that is arbitrary, and that is the decision to not accept the spiritual reality as reality, which is the irrationality of the rationalist materialism of the Western modern society, which is the basic first problem of this entire idea. And the question is, what truly moves people to create religion? From a materialistic point of view, it is disturbances of their brains, inability to explain the material world, like, oh, they couldn't know what the sun is, so they presumed it was a goddess or a god. These are materialistic explanations which have the idea, the decision, the arbitrary decision to exclude spiritual explanations. This is valid to make if the author says so, and if people are aware, and it is this awareness which at first I want to raise, because on the other hand, if we put ourselves in a spiritual perspective, in a religious perspective, we assume the gods are around us, the spirits are around us, the spiritual is around us, and how could it otherwise be that things are not motivated by the spiritual just the same? He always calls this fantasy because it comes from the 16th century. In this sense, all religion is fantasy. Fine, you can say this. I have no problem with this. But then it's more like a general critique, like not against Druids, but against religion and spirituality in the general sense, which, again, it's a perfectly fine point to criticize. But then why go to the length? I mean, why in 2021, in the Western society, where atheism and materialism is is the default mindset of almost everyone now, why it's like, what is it saying, bringing old owls to Athens. It's like it's why go to the effort in a non-spiritual society to destroy what remained of spirituality. The effort of people to revive spirituality. Why go to this tiny group and destroy their toys, so to speak? What is the goal of that? Why does one do this? Unless he has an agenda of, I don't know, reckoning with people he was personally frustrated with, which I don't know, I don't want to speculate, but the question is, why make such a video? Why destroy, why attack what people do? I mean, I'm not a Christian. I don't like Christianity for many reasons, but I don't waltz around and make constantly videos why Christ didn't exist, or why the ideas of Christianity are ludicrous, or why Christ is not a historical figure, or any such things which I could just spend my time with. But the question is, why would I do this? And this is what I don't know, and what Mr. Härger has to answer for. Why is he waltzing around when people are trying to develop, as I experience it and as I hear it, a productive way of spirituality? What does it matter how historically accurate it is? I mean, religion is never set in stone. It is also it is a little bit through the Christian lens on which he here looks at religion, which is a problem very widespread among polytheists and pagans. The Christian church had developed this narrative that their Christian religion was founded by Christ in this way, and they practiced it unchanged since then. That is the myth, that only the Christian church in this way, and then Islam, of course, and before that Judaism, but in our cultural area, Christianity has developed. And it is this Christian lens of critique that Mr. Härger and many people today have when they look at paganism, when they believe, oh, if it is not as it was exactly 2,000 years ago, it is invalid. And that is a Christian view on paganism, which is a view which you can assume, but it is problematic, to say the least. Because if I know, speaking about the Roman religion, which I know more intimately, it always changed. It was quite different in the era of King Numa. For instance, in the era of King Numa, we read from Plutarch that the Romans didn't even tolerate images of the gods because they assumed it would belittle the gods. And then take the change to what we know is it's full of images, statues, what have you, and many other things. So even a religion which wrote down things, unlike the Druids, where you can say, okay, an oral tradition maybe has an even greater chance to change, because how reliable is oral tradition, we can't say for certain. But even like Christianity, which had written sacred texts, changed from every century to every century. So it is, of course, a projection, a fabrication of Christianity in particular, to say our legitimacy is we do it because Christ made it, so 2,000 years ago. And this is a genuine Christian idea, which in my personal opinion as a pagan and polytheist has no place in paganism. Paganism and polytheism has always been changing. Not only from time to time, but from place to place. He says it himself that the idea of Druidry is possibly not something we get, but who holds this? I mean, I know from the outside there are many Druid orders, many Druid traditions, and of course sometimes they may criticize each other, but as is in paganism normal, each can go their merry way. So there is the Druid order of this and the Druid group of that, and while they may criticize each other, as we pagans and polytheists always do, we live and let live. And that makes us pagans, unlike the Christians or other monotheist book religions, who all fight against each other and saying, no, we are the only exclusive ones, because we do it as Muhammad did, or we do it as Christ did, or we do it as Moses did. This is what book religions do. We are not book religions. We do not have an original source, which either you do it exactly as it was 2,000 years ago, or you are a fraud. Now the problem is all pagan religions of Europe were interrupted by the rise of Christianity. That is the problem all pagan polytheist religions of Europe have. We have no lineages. That is the fact. I mean, there is this myth of hidden witch traditions or hidden whatever. I do not know this. I will not judge about this. It is of no relevance to me personally. But the problem is always if something was destroyed and you realize we lack spirituality in our world and we are not happy with Christian spirituality anymore, what do? You can do two things only. Either you invent something entirely new and say, I'm the new prophet of X, or you pick up or claim to pick up. And the line is much more blurry than Mr. Härger presumes. I mean, sometimes you can find, when you find a fraud, like an author of the 16th or 17th century writing about how the Gauls or the Druids acted, and then you find his private diary where he writes and admits, oh, it's all a fraud because I wanted to fool this stupid whatever. Then you can, in a criminal sense, find proof, okay, it was made up. And even then, if the question is, was he deluded about the fraud? Because if we believe in spirituality in a holistic sense, everything is divine, and the divine is everywhere. And is it sometimes not that, as it is said, the gods work in mysterious ways? Who can know these things? I mean, and that is why belief is called belief. You can mock it, you can criticize it, you can say, I do not share this way of thinking. That's all fine and good. But it is, as religion is, it is a matter of belief, and it is, especially in modern paganism, a matter of experience. I mean, it's not like we pagans do not practice religion largely like Christians. We do not go in a church and silently sit and someone preaches a sermon. Many pagan practitioners are experiencing. They are making rituals. They are making shamanistic trances. They are making anything. So for us, many pagans and polytheists, connection to the spirits, to the gods, is not something that we make up. It is something that we experience in practice. And if you do this, you are attuning yourself to energies, to spiritual levels, and you experience this. It's not like I don't know, like I'm like in Christianity, someone presents me a book and says what is written there is to be believed or else. And I believe this just in a sense like I don't know, like believing in Santa Claus. That is not how pagan polytheist religion works in our time. A lot of people are practitioners. Unlike the past, which is probably one of the greater differences, which Barthes said absolutely nothing, because it would undermine his idea that Druidry should not be re-established. In a sense, the Druid term did become vacant, so to speak. And that if it becomes vacant, it is perfectly all right that people try to find something new. I mean, what were their means? Of course, they were comparing to other religions. In the European religions in particular, because we know there are patterns of similarity. Like, for instance, the oak usually being the sacred symbol of a thunder god or such things. Like some he mentions himself, like believing in what horses say or what the omens of bird fly and so forth. There are patterns. So it's not impossible to assume that Indo-European religion have a certain pattern to which we can dare a reconstruction, even though we know that it is in a greater part a new construction. But that does not make the idea wrong or bad or invalid. And it is even the degree, which is an important point, people need to forget the past in order to create a future. I know this is a very controversial thing to say, but it is very important. Because in an idea of enlightenment, materialistic enlightenment, the idea is, or was, the more we shed light to everything, the light of truth, the better we fare. And this is, I'm speaking as a person who's quite heavily influenced also by Taoism, the idea of yin-yang. it is an idea I find highly problematic. Now, I don't want to destroy Western Enlightenment, rationalism, reason, modern science. Far from it. That would be the extreme to the other side. But the idea of enlightenment, of modern rational thinking, is a loop-sided development of the human mind, of the human spirit, towards logicism, towards the logos. And all intuition, all that is the deeper spiritual levels of human reality were cast away. And the problem is, if you have this view that all must be shed light of truth on, you are an inhuman and, I say, anti-life way of doing things. And one example I can take purely as a historian, without a shred of material, of spirituality, is the identity of France, the follow-up state of the Gaul. The idea that people become French is a fabrication based on forgetting the past. This is the reality of it. People became French. The French regions were long, many centuries at war with each other. I'm not going into the details of French history because it would make this video unending and probably bore people to death. But the reality is the identity of being French was created over time by slowly forgetting past grievances between the groups that then made up France. This is the historical way of forming any identity whatsoever. Like, you identify with one is, to a degree, always a step which is based on forgetting what divided us before. Because otherwise we would be nobody. We would be nothing. And it is, I mean, there are a few given identities. For instance, I'm a gay man, which is presumed in modern belief to be genetic. I don't know whether it is, and it's not relevant to me, but let's assume it would be so. Or by the melatonin of my skin and the genetic makeup, I am a white man, so, which is not an arbitrary identity, but one that is like the die is cast, was given to me, and I have to deal with it. But it is quite a meager, small amount, and the largest amount is what I subscribe to, what I've learned, what I found in the regions where I grew up. And all of these things are essentially arbitrary. He says so, of course it is true. In that sense, yes, in theory anyone can be anything, but in factuality not. Because the principle of paganism is to accept the natural growth of things. People grow like the tree. That is why trees are sacred to literally all pagan religions. By the way, even including Roman ones. They had their sacred tree ideas just the same, and sacred groves. That is why trees are sacred to us, because we believe to the idea of natural growth. Whereas in the modern technological work, it is the idea of the machine. The machine is something which can be broken up and put together arbitrarily. This is the modernist materialist view. And in this sense, anyone can become a Roman, anyone can become a Celtic, and so forth. And this is not true. It is not that it is a hard barrier, but it is a certain barrier. And it is not that you can waltz into every Gaul tribe from the other end of the world and say, okay, I subscribe to your cultural habits, and then you would be welcome just as one of theirs. We know from historical sources, so there are a few people who we know, for instance, some Roman sources who wrote about people of black skin in a negative way. So we know that the racist feeling, as we would call it, existed in the past just the same. And if into a Celtic tribe, hundreds of people from, say, Africa or India or China would suddenly migrate, they would not accept them no matter how far they would adopt to Celtic culture. It is not to say one way is right or the other is right. This is not far beyond me to say. I'm just saying the idea that everyone can become a Celt or everyone is a matter of numbers. If a certain small number of people comes there, you can assimilate them, and then over time, and then it is also how far away. If we know for a Gallo-Romanic culture, for reasons, the Romans and the Celts were neighbors, and as different as they were, they had similarities enough that after the conquest of Gaul, which was bloody enough and brutal enough, still it took a very short time for the Gallo-Romanic culture to emerge. This was possible because these cultures, in the context of the Indo-European cultures group, were similar enough. And if you looked at a person, just from looking, if you looked at a person from southern Gaul and you looked at a Roman, from the genetic makeup which fabricates our appearance, they would not very likely see that person as a total stranger. Unless, like, people from Japan, ancient Japan or ancient China would have come into Gaul or come into Rome, it would be quite a different story. And as I'm saying, I'm not saying to judge this, not to say one is right or not right. I'm just saying that the idea that anyone can at all time become Celt, become Roman, is in itself just wrong. Because it is denying the idea that things must, if they change by natural growth, not by breaking up a group and then just inserting unlimited number of people. So people have asked me, can people become a Roman cultor, a follower of the Roman religion, if they are from Africa or from China? And my personal answer is, of course, yes, everyone can. I mean, especially today in eras of mass migration, I personally think, what difference does it make? But I also think that the reverse is true, which is in our political climate, I have to say, very problematic thing, strangely to say, when I'm practicing Chinese Taoism, which I do not only as a philosopher, but also in the occult way, the spiritual practices. There are many people, especially in the Western culture, who say, a white guy, you're not allowed to do this. Which I say, why? I have no problem if a person from Africa or China becomes a Roman cultor. Because Roman culture is not my personal property. It does not belong to me. I'm not the master of deciding who it is. As a spiritual person first, I am first a spiritual, before I'm German, before I'm white, before I'm a man, I'm a spiritual person. I'm a spiritual seeker. I am a part, as Socrates said, a citizen of the world. That is my personal view on myself. But so of course, I believe in a very open idea that if people come into a cultural setting, I accept this, and I believe the people in the past were willing to do that just the same. But we had this interlope in between of a Christian era, which is still existing and dominant in many parts, which had a different modus of things. I mean, you could become a Christian just by confessing to, but there still was this cultural hubris, shall we say, this is a difficult heritage which we have to deal, but that would be a point of another. I'm just saying it is not as simplistic as to say, yeah, everyone can become a Celt, therefore Celt is not he always makes this gesture, what is it called in English? Like saying it is a Celt, like, or Druid, like it is a thing which doesn't exist. And I think that is just, it takes away this pagan idea that the thing has to grow, and that is like communal identity is something that grows. It is not something that you fabricate. If people came to become, let's take another example, Germans. We know the German identity through Tacitus' Germania. The text usually called as thus. He criticizes Tacitus' Germania greatly in an, I say, outdated point of historical view, like Tacitus mainly, so he says, wrote the Germania to criticize Rome. And this has been outdated because of archaeology and modern science. Why? We know today, for two reasons. Why? First, we know today the vast majority of what Tacitus wrote is accurate. Unless in pre-modern times, in times before modern archaeology, people were uncertain and long presumed that it was inaccurate. this is the one most important point. We know that a lot of things that Tacitus wrote is backed up by the most modern historical and archaeological scientists. The second and almost more important thing is, if you read Tacitus' Germania, it is in no way a praise. He describes the Germanics as stupid, as lazy, as it is just as much praise as it is derogatory. I would say it is even way more derogatory a description of the Germanic people than it is a praise. So this idea that he uses this merely to write with the misleading idea to tell the Romans, oh, this is the noble savage, we have to be like this. This is a modern perspective which is inaccurate, and you can find it by just reading it. It is not a flattering description of the Germans. Not at all. And it is not because of a modern lens. It is, they're lazy, they're silly, they're easy to be fooled, and all matter of things which are clearly not the noble savage that Tacitus wants the Roman to aspire to. There are some elements, probably, but then we can assume from the experience of Tacitus through the most modern historical science that he was quite reliable. It's not to say that all Greco-Roman texts are, but it is found to be quite a reliable source. And he writes that the Germans came to identify themselves because one tribe started to call themselves Germans in order, and the term was frightening to their Celtic neighbors, so Tacitus wrote, and so other Germans began to adapt the term German to themselves. It is one of the miracles of cultural identity. And my second science, I'm not only a magister of history, I'm also a magister of sociology, and I know something about identity, sort of a special topic I'm studying for decades. The identity a group has exists before it is phrased in a term. People have an identity, but they cannot name it until they come into contact with something that is different. And one of the most striking examples is the pagan religions had usually no names for themselves because polytheism was the default. That is why there is no term for the Roman religion. There is no term for the German religion, for the Celtic religion in the past, because their polytheistic traditional way, what the Romans call the mos maiorum, the way of the fathers, or the ancient ways, it was in their perspective always so, and what was always so, what was the default, Emperor Julian, the last pagan emperor of Rome, wrote that he starts to call their own religious group the Hellenic. It's a little bit strange given that he was supposed to be a Roman Empire, but that would be another point. He starts to have a term for his own people, the polytheist Greco-Roman pagans, calling him and their own people Hellenic, because he is now in contact with another group, a competitor, the Christians. At the moment the Christians arrived at the scene, and he clearly, Julian wrote, the Christians were a religion unlike any other. So there is the perspective of pagan Europe, there is the way that we always have done, and they start to have a name for it only at the moment when another appears. The Christians, who in structure are different from everything they know. That does not mean that the thing they did not exist. It just wasn't so aware to them that they have a name. Or if I can make another example from a personal history, I'm, as I said, a gay person. And in the past, I'm 50, so I know the times when it was a little bit different. In the past, many straight people didn't know the term straight. Many heterosexual people, if you told them you are a heterosexual, they would be very offended because they, as heterosexuals, didn't know the word. They didn't know it because being not heterosexual was just outside of their perception, and they had no term for themselves. That was why many straight people at the time, if asked, they would just about their sexuality, would just call them normal. And that is the same when he says, oh, did they define as Druid? Did they define as Gauls, as Celtic? No, probably not, until they meet met something that was different. But that doesn't mean that it didn't exist, as he is supposed to say. Like, oh, the Celt is just made up, Germanic is just made up. Yes, it is, but it is not like someone comes arbitrarily, like it is a technocratic, modern, technological view and puts a stamp on people, like Tacitus goes to Germany and says, you're now called Germans. That is not how history functions. Identities grow. That is the natural way of things. And that does not make them artificial, like he assumes from this technological modernist view, like, oh, it's constructed, therefore it's not valid. That is not how identity works, that is not how spirituality works, and that is not how life works. Life works that we grow into things, or grow out of them, or grow into multiple things. I mean, many pagans I know are not focused on one pagan religion, which is also a very pagan thing, because many, almost as far as we know this from the Romans, and it was a problem for many Roman authorities, were very interested in other religions, other cults, and we can assume that all people of the pagan polytheist past were interested, of course, in what their neighbors did, and sometimes adapted it. That is how life works. That is not discrediting things, that they change over time. And again, the problem that paganism has is we had an artificial, brutal cut through the rise of Christianity, and there was no way other than picking it up relatively arbitrarily at some point by some system. And to believe whether it was divinely inspired, as I would believe, or from a materialistic view say it is made up and therefore untrue, well, it's up to the individual. That is Mr. Härger's right to presume and to doubt. And one of the very good examples is, for instance, Wicca, witchcraft. And saying it again, I'm not a Wicca, I'm not a witch, I'm not interested in these, and I've no personal stick in Wicca and witchcraft. But you see in Wicca and witchcraft how productive a thing can be. And there is, if anyone who practices magic is a creative act of make-believe. You believe and therefore it becomes so. And this is even from a sociological view to argue, as again, the identity of nations, of cultures, of groups where we say we are now French. It is a magical act, not made like this, but a magic that manifests itself over time. Through actions, through, like, they invent holidays, they make up myth. What is mythology? Then a story told, which then creates a reality. But if you're a spiritual person, the origin is not just the brain of the human ape, it is in turn the spirit which makes us create myth. That is, of course, the question what you personally believe, but as a practitioner of the occult, I believe that the source is the higher worlds, the spiritual worlds, which cause us to create stories, which make us to create myth. And they adapt. They always take the form fitting to the time. So, of course, our way of Druidry, our way of witchcraft, our way of whatever you do, is not the way like it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years, or 1,000 years ago. But it never is. Even in the book religions, with all their writings like Christianity and Islam, it is not. To expect that from a religion is, I'm sorry to say this, is a wrong expectation of what the function of religion is. Purely from a sociological point of view, the function of religion is not to stay as it was. That is a view that brought Christianity into perspective, which our pagan polytheist ancestors never had. As far as we know, they never had this idea. There is sometimes this, we return to the elder ways. Yes. But even then it is this constant struggle between taking between leaving a thing in its roots, but also developing. These are two forces of all human development. Chaos and order, if you want to call it. The chaos that wants to evolve, that wants to change, adapt to new times, to new demands of the time, and then order the will to bind things back and not let fantasy go wild. These are 2 points of all spiritual development, both in the individual and in the religion at large. And we are in this struggle always. We bind things back by looking, oh, what sources do we have? What archaeological proof do we have? What anything that binds a thing, that it does not chaotically go wild and change every day, and that everyone does its own thing. So people are no longer able to communicate or no longer able to do a thing together that needs a certain sameness. So people have a basis to do a thing together. Like if you are Wicca, become Wicca, you have a certain basic system of ideas to which you subscribe in order to have others with which you can do cultic practice. But within that, you can express a lot of things, and that is a sort of balance. Of course, it is something we struggle daily, weekly, yearly, by each generation anew. But that is what other option had people than to say, okay, maybe we don't know so much, but maybe what our intuition says, what our inner guidance says, we just follow it and then over generation develop it on. And if we believe in the gods and the spiritual, as I do, maybe we can assume also that such was the will of the divine or the spirits to guide us through this path. And then we do correct some errors or cast off some things which we do no longer find appropriate. But we do not these things wanton. It is not a process like, I said, again, a materialistic engineer sits there and dissects things. They grow, they develop, and they become true in the sense, in the magical act by belief. In the same way we told ourselves myth, stories. They come from what is inside and they create something. I mean, you can read all the canon of the psychologist C.G. Jung about archetypes. To have, if you want a more scientific, materialistic view, like there is something inside, like the archetypes, which always resurface. And so, of course, we can assume some things we create, not ad hoc, not right away perfect, but over the generations we feel back to the roots which have been buried. We feel back to the energies which we have cut our way off and reconnect to things. It's like if you cut a friendship and then return after 10, 20 years and restore that friendship. You have to relearn that person anew because 20 years have passed and he experienced all things. So it is a process. And if we cut ourselves from the gods, from the spirits, of course it takes time. And in the case of spirituality, it takes much longer. We carefully look what feels right. What creates an echo which echoes which in ourselves and in the community and also in the locality. And there is no clear right and wrong, and to say this cannot be called Druidry for said reasons. So I'm seeing that I've already spoken an hour about this, and I do not want to make this video longer than his. I'm already afraid that nobody will watch or listen to this. But in the sense of a spiritual seeker, I felt that the moral and spiritual necessity to say something about this. I hope even if you are following Druidry and other Celtic ways, and forgive me that I'm trying to defend a general point by using this as an example, forgive me that I am not extremely educated in what modern Druids do, but as a service, or say as a friendly gesture, hopefully, from one group of spiritual seekers to another, in which we are all together restoring our spiritual connections, I wanted to say a little bit about this. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope Mr. Härger does not find my video too offensive. But as a spiritual seeker and a religious person, I felt it was necessary to bring this alternative view. Thank you for listening.